March 8, 1952, 10:47 p.m. Arnold Schuster turned onto 45th Street in Borough Park, Brooklyn. 24 years old, tired from his shift at the clothing store, thinking about the TV interview he'd done that afternoon. Thinking about Willie Sutton, the bank robber he'd spotted on the subway 3 weeks ago. Thinking about being a hero. He never saw the gunman step out from between the parked cars. 4 shots, 2 to the groin, 1 to each eye. Arnold Schuster died on the sidewalk 6 houses from home, his blood pooling under the streetlights while his killer disappeared into a black sedan that screamed into the Brooklyn night. The murder shocked New York. Not because a man died. Men died in Brooklyn every night. But because Arnold Schuster wasn't a gangster. He wasn't a wise guy. He wasn't in the life. He was a tailor's assistant who'd done his civic duty, who'd helped catch a fugitive, who'd appeared on television proud and smiling, and someone had executed him like he was a rat. Who'd testified against the mob. The NYPD launched the biggest manhunt in its history. Over 4,000 people questioned, over 300 suspects investigated. But nobody talked. The code of silence held, and Arnold Schuster's murder went unsolved. What the police didn't know, what they wouldn't learn for 11 years, was that the order to kill Arnold Schuster came from one of the deadliest men in American organized crime. A man who'd built his reputation on murder, a man they called the Lord High Executioner, Albert Anastasia. To understand why Albert Anastasia ordered the death of a man he'd never met, a man who had nothing to do with mob business, you need to understand who Anastasia was in 1952. He wasn't just another Brooklyn boss, he was the co-founder of Murder, Inc., the enforcement arm of the national crime syndicate that had carried out hundreds of contract killings across America in the 1930s and 40s. He'd personally participated in the assassination of Joe Masseria in 1931, the hit that ended the Castellamarese War and put Lucky Luciano on top. He'd killed his own boss, Vincent Mangano, in 1951, throwing his body into a marsh and taking control of what would become the Gambino family. By 1952, Anastasia controlled the Brooklyn waterfront. Longshoremen paid tribute. Ships didn't move without his permission. He'd served in the U.S. Army during World War II, training dock workers, earning his citizenship through military service while simultaneously running his criminal empire. He was untouchable, powerful, feared. But Albert Anastasia had a fatal flaw. He was impulsive, violent, quick to rage. Where other mob bosses calculated, Anastasia reacted. Where they played chess, he grabbed a gun. And on February 20th, 1952, that flaw would lead him to make a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. Because on that night, sitting in his Fort Lee, New Jersey mansion, Albert Anastasia turned on his television and saw something that made his blood boil. He saw Arnold Schuster, smiling, talking about how he'd followed Willie Sutton, how he'd helped the police, how proud he was to be a good citizen. And Anastasia, the man who'd killed for money, for power, for territory, decided to kill for something far more irrational. He decided to kill because he couldn't stand squealers. 3 weeks earlier, February 18th, 1952. Arnold Schuster was riding the R train uptown after work when he looked up and saw a face he recognized from wanted posters. Willie the actor Sutton, one of the FBI's most wanted bank robbers, sat directly across from him on the subway, reading a newspaper like any other commuter. Schuster's heart pounded. Willie Sutton had robbed over 100 banks in his career. He'd escaped from prison 3 times, including a daring break from Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia in 1947, where he'd scaled a 30-foot wall. He was famous, notorious, and there he was, riding the subway like a regular person. Schuster followed. Sutton, when he got off at Pacific Street and Park Slope, watched him walk to a garage, watched him try to start his car, watched the engine fail, watched Sutton get out to buy a new battery. Then, Schuster flagged down a patrol car. "I think that's Willie Sutton working on that car down the block." The officers didn't believe him at first, but they ran the plates, approached carefully, and made the arrest. Willie Sutton's 5-year run as a fugitive ended because a 24-year-old clothing salesman recognized him on the subway. The newspapers loved it. Amateur detective nabs Willie the actor. The police commissioner invited Schuster to headquarters for a photo op. Local TV stations wanted interviews. and Arnold Schuster, who'd lived a quiet life in Borough Park with his parents, suddenly became a minor celebrity. On February 20th, he appeared on a television interview. He told the story again, how he'd recognized Sutton, how he'd followed him, how he'd done his civic duty. The interviewer asked if he was worried about retaliation. "From who?" Schuster laughed. "Willie Sutton's a bank robber, not a mobster. He worked alone. Who's going to come after me?" In Fort Lee, New Jersey, Albert Anastasia watched that interview in his living room. Several of his capos were there. They were discussing business, waterfront operations, collections from the Longshoremen's Union. The TV was just background noise, until Anastasia saw Arnold Schuster's face. "Who's that?" Anastasia asked, pointing at the screen. "Some guy who turned in Willie Sutton," one of his men answered. "Spotted him on the subway." Anastasia's face darkened. He watched Schuster smile, watched him talk about being a good citizen, watched him bask in the attention, and something in Anastasia snapped. "I can't stand squealers," Anastasia said quietly, then louder. "I can't stand squealers!" He pointed at the television screen, at Arnold Schuster's smiling face. "Hit that guy!" The room went silent. Nobody moved. One of the capos, an older soldier named Anthony Coppola, spoke carefully. "Boss, this guy's not in the life. He's not connected. He didn't rat on us. He just helped the cops catch a bank robber." Anastasia turned on him, eyes blazing. "I don't care. He's on television bragging about being a rat. He's proud of it. He's making it look good to squeal to the cops. I want him dead. I want every rat in this city to know what happens when you talk to the police." "But boss, there's rules about this. The commission won't like—" "The commission works for me," Anastasia shouted. "I'm the Lord High Executioner. I decide who lives and dies. Now somebody get me Frederick Tenuto." Frederick Tenuto was a fugitive hitman, a professional killer who'd been on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list since 1950. He'd done work for Murder, Inc. He was ruthless, efficient, and he owed Anastasia favors. Within 3 days, Tenuto had accepted the contract, $5,000 to kill a civilian. Nobody had ever heard of. Easy money. Nobody in that room, including Anastasia himself, realized what that decision would cost. March 8, 1952. 10:47 p.m. Arnold Schuster died on a Brooklyn sidewalk, and the city exploded in outrage. When gangsters killed gangsters, New Yorkers shrugged. That was the life. You lived by the sword. You died by it. But Arnold Schuster wasn't a gangster. He was a working-class kid who'd done the right thing, and now he was dead because of it. The newspapers ran front-page headlines. "Hero slain. Good Samaritan murdered. Is this the thanks citizens get?" The police commissioner held a press conference promising justice. The mayor offered a $25,000 reward. The FBI joined the investigation. More than 4,000 people were questioned. Every mob associate in Brooklyn was brought in for interrogation, but the code of silence held. Nobody talked. Nobody knew anything. Frederick Tenuto, the suspected triggerman, disappeared completely. He'd never be seen again. Years later, mob informant Joe Valaki would testify that Anastasia had Tenuto killed immediately after the Schuster hit to eliminate the only witness who could tie him to the murder. But while the police found nothing, the mob bosses found plenty. They found a catastrophic mistake. Frank Costello, the prime minister of the underworld, Anastasia's closest ally, called an emergency meeting of the commission. All 5 families sent representatives. This wasn't a normal sit-down. This was damage control. "You killed a civilian," Costello said to Anastasia, his voice ice cold. "Not just any civilian, a guy who did nothing to us, a guy the whole city loved. You brought heat on all of us for what? Because you saw him on television?" Anastasia bristled. "He was a squealer. He bragged about, he turned in a bank robber," Vito Genovese interrupted. Genovese, who hated Anastasia, who'd been looking for any excuse to move against him, saw his opening. "Willie Sutton had nothing to do with us. He wasn't even Italian. You killed an innocent man, and now every cop in New York is crawling up our ass." Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's own underboss, sat silent. He'd warned Anastasia this would happen. He'd told him the commission would see it as a violation of the unwritten rules. But Anastasia hadn't listened. Anastasia never listened. "There's rules," said Tommy Lucchese, boss of his own family. "We don't kill civilians. We don't bring attention. We don't make the papers. You broke all 3 rules because you got emotional watching television. The commission couldn't kill Anastasia. Not yet. He was too powerful, too connected to Costello. But they remembered. They filed it away. And men like Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino started planning. The Schuster murder became Anastasia's greatest liability. Every time he had a dispute with another boss, they'd bring it up. Remember when Albert killed that civilian? It became proof that he was unstable, impulsive, dangerous, even to the organization itself. 5 years later, in 1957, when Genovese finally moved to consolidate power in New York, the Schuster murder was part of his justification. Albert's out of control. He kills people for no reason. He brings heat. He's bad for business. And Carlo Gambino, who'd been sitting in those meetings, who'd watched Anastasia make mistake after mistake, agreed to betray his boss. Because in the end, Albert Anastasia's downfall didn't come from the police. It came from his own people, from men who decided that a boss who killed civilians on impulse was too dangerous to let live. The Schuster murder had sealed Anastasia's fate. He just didn't know it yet. October 25, 1957, 10:15 a.m., Park Sheraton Hotel, Manhattan. Albert Anastasia walked into the barbershop on the ground floor. His bodyguard, Anthony Coppola, the same capo who'd questioned the Schuster hit 5 years earlier, stayed outside. Later, people would wonder if Coppola knew what was coming, if he'd been turned, if leaving Anastasia alone was part of the plan. The barbershop was quiet. Friday morning, not many customers. Anastasia settled into chair number 4, facing the mirror. The barber draped him with hot towels. Anastasia closed his eyes. At 10:20, 2 men in scarves and sunglasses rushed through the door. They drew pistols and opened fire. 10 shots. Anastasia, groggy from the hot towels, disoriented, saw movement in the mirror. He lurched from the chair, charging at what he thought were his attackers. But he was charging at their reflections, stumbling toward the mirror while the real gunmen stood behind him, emptying their weapons into his back. Albert Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner, the man who'd killed for Lucky Luciano, who'd built Murder, Inc., who'd terrorized the Brooklyn waterfront for 2 decades, died on a barbershop floor, covered in white towels that slowly turned red. The killers ran out. Witnesses described them but couldn't identify them. The guns were found in a trash can 2 blocks away. No arrests were ever made. But everyone knew. Vito Genovese had ordered it. Carlo Gambino had approved it, maybe even arranged it. With Frank Costello's power diminished after a failed assassination attempt 6 months earlier, Anastasia had no protection. The commission had decided he was a liability. The Schuster murder, the impulsive violence, the constant heat, it had all added up. They'd waited 5 years. But they remembered. Carlo Gambino took control of the family that same day. He renamed it, restructured it, and under his leadership it became the most powerful mob family in America. Gambino was everything Anastasia wasn't: patient, calculating, quiet. He lasted 3 decades as boss. He died of natural causes in 1974, in his own bed, having never spent a single day in prison. Albert Anastasia lasted 6 years as boss. He died in a barber chair, gunned down by his own people, killed by the same kind of violence he'd spent. His whole life dishing out. In 1963, mob turncoat Joe Valachi testified before Congress, the first made member of the mafia to break omertà publicly. He told the world about the commission, about the 5 families, about Murder, Inc., and he told them about Arnold Schuster. Anastasia saw this kid on TV talking about turning in Willie Sutton, Valachi testified. He got mad and said, "I can't stand squealers. Hit that guy." Just like that. The kid had nothing to do with us, but Anastasia wanted him dead because he went on television. The Arnold Schuster case was never officially solved. Frederick Tenuto, the suspected killer, was never found. But in the history books in the mob archives, everyone knows what happened. Albert Anastasia pointed at a man on a television screen and said 3 words that killed them both. Hit that guy. Arnold Schuster never made it home that night, and 5 years later, Albert Anastasia never made it out of that barber chair. In the underworld, they call it poetic justice. In the real world, they call it what happens when you let rage make your decisions. Albert Anastasia built an empire on murder, and murder's what finally came for him.